Hi, this is Kirby Sommers for the Epstein Project podcast. I wasn't going to be discussing Bill Gates anymore, but the New York Times has written an article claiming that Jeffrey Epstein introduced Bill Gates to Leon Black after 2013. That is incorrect. So I'm going to go into some of the details about this. But first, I want to thank you for the great comments and questions you guys left on my previous podcasts, where I do deep dives into Bill Gates and his connection to BlackCube and his connection to all these other things. And I do want to thank Dr. Vicky, who is one of my sponsors. Um, if you're ever in Minneapolis, in Rochester, Minneapolis, where they have incredible, world famous medical care, uh, do pay her a visit. She provides non surgical, low risk services for anti aging. And so she can turn back the hands of time a good 10 years in just one or two visits. Um, Her company, her clinic is a new med spa, and her website is medspa.clinic. So please give her a ring if you're in Rochester, Minneapolis. And also, please support this podcast. A one-time contribution or a recurring contribution at kirbysummers.com contribute would be very helpful for me to continue bringing you stories that mainstream media is not going to be discussing. So let me just jump into the Bill Gates thing. Okay, so the New York Times has decided to focus on Bill Gates' infidelity. They talk about the fact that Gates had a quote consensual end quote affair with someone who worked for him and that it ended amicably. 20 years ago, they talk about the fact that he has been coming on to people who work for him, but they make sure to say in this article and now other articles, because through his spokesperson, who happens to be a woman, and of course there's a reason for that, right? If you have either a woman represent you like Harvey Weinstein did in court, or you have a woman become your spokesperson like Bill Gates is doing right now, uh, speaking to the press on your behalf. Psychologically, what that does is it lowers the defense of women who are finally being heard, because we have been preyed upon our entire lives. Whether you're 15 or you're 50, you are always bombarded with being preyed upon by men, and especially powerful men. So the fact that the New York Times and other mainstream media are trying to keep this story as a story about, interestingly enough, predation, while claiming it wasn't predation because, he didn't force anyone to sleep with him, he would politely ask, well, before I get into talking about Bill Gates, his knowledge about Leon Black, Michael Milken, and these other people, I do want to just emphasize that if you're in a workplace and your boss, or even it doesn't even have to be your boss. I mean, your boss being Bill Gates, that's a pretty serious boss. But if you're in an office or you work for McDonald's and a superior to your position is making passes at you, it is considered legally an unfriendly and a hostile workplace environment, because that's called sexual harassment. So the Times does talk about the fact that there was someone who worked for Bill Gates who still works for Bill Gates as an advisor, ironically, a financial advisor, who was alleged to have been accused of sexual harassment, but who settled, who signed a non-disclosure, paid a couple of dollars to the woman, and basically made this woman go away. And historically, that's how it's been done, right? You pay the woman a couple of dollars. It's usually 150, 100, $150,000, and this woman just is supposed to disappear. What's less known with these non-disclosure agreements is that then the woman is blackballed, so that she is no longer going to be hired for the same position in another company, because she is going to be talked about badly by somebody like Bill Gates, who will not give her a good review, or so that there's more to it when you take that measly $100,000, $150,000, you pretty much are put out of being able to earn a living. That aside, um, Bill Gates dropped out of school in 1975 to start Microsoft. And by the time he became 31, he became a billionaire. And the primary reason for his success, and mainstream has got this like rags to riches story as though it's really a rags to riches story, and which it's not quite. Um, Part of his success is attributed to his parents, and in particular to his mother, Mary Maxwell Gates, who I spoke about in my second podcast of Bill Gates. I'll have all of my other podcasts on him in the description box below. Well, she was the on the board. I think she ran the board of United Way. Um, So, as the board member, and I think again in her case, she was the head board member of United Way, which is a large nonprofit, she met a guy by the name of John Opel. John Opel was the chairman of IBM, who also sat on the board. And so at the time, Microsoft was a small company. It was only 5 years old. And Mary introduced her son to John Opel, who was the chairman of IBM. Okay, well, that sort of started Bill Gates' rise into billions and billions of dollars. So let me just say that Leon Black worked for Drexel, and basically was Drexel's. He worked at Drexel. He kind of, I think, after he graduated college, he is Eli Black's son. Eli Black, you may know him as being the man who either jumped or was pushed out of the 44th floor window of the Pan Am building. I believe it was in 1973. It could be 1973, 1975. A lot of this I'm just telling you out of memory, because there's just so much going on here. Um, he then went to work for Burnham. He became kind of the right-hand man to Michael Milken. And there's a lot that I'm going to be talking about Michael Milken. Now, that's back in the late 1970s, okay? So, Michael Milken, Michael Milken really should be known as the person who has used public relations and reputation management better than anybody else on the planet. Michael Milken was caught in perhaps the biggest scandal we've ever had, the biggest financial scandal we've ever had, and he went to jail. He was caught doing all kinds of illegal things, including insider trading with what were called Milken's monsters. Among Milken's monsters were Meshulam Riklis. You've heard me say that name. Meshulam Riklis is the father of my abuser. Michael Milken learned a lot from Meshulam Riklis, who became one of his first clients at Drexel and who brought along all of the other raiders, Carl Icahn, um, anyone who wanted to make a fast dollar on what was called junk bonds. So basically, the way they did this was they would take over a company, a distressed company, without paying any money. They would use the assets of that company to buy it. It was a very convoluted thing that Meshulam Riklis created and that Michael Milken took major advantage of. And then they would kind of destroy the company by selling it off into bits and pieces. Now, these were publicly traded companies, so that what they were essentially doing, they were not only stealing from the stockholders, but they were putting out of work thousands and thousands of Americans because a lot of these companies were based in the United States at the time, and they were looting the pension funds. And so when I say pension funds, I want you to keep in mind that that's exactly one of the things that Robert Maxwell was accused of doing. All of these men were literally just thieves, and that's what they were remembered for. Michael Milken was, he went to Wharton. And for that, I do have some notes that I want to sort of find here. He went to Wharton, and let me just get my information here on Milken, because Milken knew that he couldn't run the kind of business that ultimately he wanted without the use of computers. When he went to Wharton, in fact, one of his and it's Wharton Business School. So when he went to Wharton Business School, one of his majors was pretty much in finance and computers, because by then you really couldn't do one without the other. A lot of the other um, companies that were in, let's say, they were selling bonds or they were selling stocks, so the other financial services companies were not necessarily using computers, but he knew that there was an advantage to using computers, so that when he moved to Century City in Los Angeles in July of 1978, he pretty much concentrated on the key role of information technology. And he needed to be able to do this in a way that he could create a program so that they could easily pull up somebody's name. So it's very similar to the Promise software created in the I think it was late 1970s, 1980s. Um, that was then stolen by the federal government. That was then sold by Robert Maxwell. It was created by Bill Hamilton through his company. It's similar to that. And so he was a specialist in finance and information systems. And he started his career at Drexel in 1970. And what he did was he took IBM's computer. Now, he was using the state of the art at the time, Prime 550 Model 2. That may not make any sense to most of you. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but that was IBM's leading computer. It was the most advanced computer, and what he did with and so my point being that Michael Milken had a direct relationship with IBM starting from 1970 because he needed their help in order to set up this very elaborate um, computer system that would help um, him with like just shy of 10,000 different securities that he was involved with in the public market. Now, think about it, 10,000 different securities that he was dealing. So, uh, he had a lot of people working underneath him, also selling these securities, and he needed a way to quickly pull up information. So, the system was created and for Drexel, and it was used by all of the guys, including Leon Black, who was his, like I said, his right hand man. Um, so at the time, anyone who was in Milken's monsters, so like Michelle Limrickless, Carl Icahn, um, and like all you have to do is just pull up Milken's monsters, and you'll see the list of men who were part of this group of junk bond traders. They didn't just run over to Milken's office, sit there and talk about which company they were going to take over. They would also want to invest in like companies that were future companies, and some of these companies included Microsoft and included Apple. So it included getting to know Bill Gates. It included getting to know Steve Jobs, and so they would trek off. Milken's office was in California, and Jobs and Gates were not too far away in San Francisco. That's, I believe, if I remember, was sort of like a 45-minute plane ride. It was not difficult to go from one office to the other to keep talking to different people. And so Michael Milken would have already met Bill Gates before the end of the 1970s. And if Michael Milken met Bill Gates before the end of 1970s, his right-hand man, Leon Black, would have met him as well, meaning that the facade that is being created today to cover up the Jeffrey Epstein story, that Jeffrey Epstein introduced Leon Black to Bill Gates or vice versa after after 2013. So essentially, they mean 2014, so on and so forth. Well, after Milken came out of jail, and even when he was put in jail, he hired Peggy Siegel, who you've heard about because she was also involved with helping rehabilitate Jeffrey Epstein's public relations image. And he tried to bribe Connie Bruck, who wrote The Predator's Ball, into not writing the book. He offered her $1 million. And when she did not concede and she continued to write The Predator's Ball, um, he pretty much, there was a hit. She was afraid for her life, number one, because there were threats made to kill her. She was being followed. So it was sort of like a BlackCube situation all over again. And by the way, Bill Gates owns BlackCube through the company his father started, uh, K&L Gates, who was the attorney and the advisor for BlackCube. Bill Gates Jr. is a partner in that company. So essentially, um, Bill Gates has been knowledgeable about these intimidation tactics for a long time. These intimidation tactics were used by Michael Milken, and then the rehabilitation of removing all of that bad press from the internet, replacing it with his philanthropic work. And I'm so tired of hearing the word philanthropy, because when I hear the word philanthropy, what I see are the flashing words cover up, liar, thief. That's what I hear. So philanthropist is just someone who is covering up dirty deeds for the most part. I've yet in my life to meet a philanthropist or a nonprofit organization who's actually doing what their mission statement claims they're doing. When you dig, like, you have to dig, and the information is not easily found because mainstream media does not report on this, which is why I urge you to subscribe to my Epstein Project newsletter. I send out a newsletter every Tuesday and I do deep dives. There's some stuff I can't put on YouTube because I'll lose that channel, right? There's some stuff I can't tweet because I'll lose that channel, but I do go into like my deep dives in my newsletter. So please get on my mailing list, become a paying subscriber, help me stay in this role, where, because as an insider who spent 8 years as a blank slave to the son of Meshulam Rickless, who was in the thick of these men for years and years, I know stuff that somebody else will never know, not even somebody like James Stewart, who I adore. He's a New York Times reporter, and he wrote a book exposing Michael Milken called Den of Thieves. And in fact, Jeffrey Epstein wanted to hire him to write his own book. Again, public relations ploy. To his credit, James Stewart walked away and did not pursue it. And shortly thereafter, Epstein was arrested. So when Michael Milken was arrested, put in jail, along with Ivan Boisky, who was one of the people who provided information showing that indeed Michael Milken was guilty of these things. And a footnote, Boisky is a Mossad spy. Story for another day. But he left the country. He left the country. There are a lot of spies in this story, and mainstream media is not talking about the spy angle, and they never will. They never will. But I do. I talk about the spy angle all the time. So in any event, when Michael Milken was sent to jail, um, Leon Black, who was as guilty as Michael Milken, as guilty as Dennis Levine, as guilty as all of the guys who ended up doing jail time. Guess what happened to Leon Black? Nothing. There's a reason for that, and I'm not going to get into it in this podcast. But Leon Black, with Michael Milken's brother, with Michael Milken's son, Lance, with a couple of the other guys from Drexel, they went off and they created Apollo. They created Apollo, and by then they had already done several things. They had invested, let's say, in companies that were purchased by Meshulam Rickless, like E2 Holdings, which held Samsonite. So if you look at the holdings of Leon Black, and companies that have made him money, you will see that he is a large stakeholder. I don't know if he still is, but he was, of Samsonite. Now, Samsonite is the luggage company. So at the time, talk about insider trading. Michelle and Rickless purchased E2 Holdings, and suddenly Leon Black, an insider who was part of that deal, owns a great deal of the stock for Samsonite. He became partners with another radar raider, Carl Icahn, who is very invested in Mount Sinai, which is connected again to Epstein through Eva Anderson Dubin and Selena Dubin. I mean, they're just these, and I call them circles within circles with these people. And again, there are reasons for that. And if you listen to my podcast carefully, not just this one, but all of the ones that I have done to date, you will start seeing where the connections meet. So he goes off and he starts Apollo, and then it's discovered that it wasn't just Leslie Wexner who was providing Jeffrey Epstein money by not just people believe that Leslie Wexner only purchased and gave Jeffrey Epstein one mansion, the one on up the Upper East Side. No, he gave him several homes. He made it possible for him to buy the island. He gave him the airplane that would later be known as the Lolita Express. He gave him many things, including famous artwork, antiques, like just an incredible amount of things, and buildings and properties in multiple areas were passed down to Jeffrey Epstein. So I, that's going to take another podcast. I'm not going to go deep into that. But then it was discovered that Leon Black had provided Jeffrey Epstein with over $150 million. Um, and Somebody else from another financial publication wrote, oh, I know, I think it was Vanity Fair, wrote an article some months ago saying, oh, is Leon Black being blackmailed? No, he's one of the bosses. He is one of the bosses, just like just like Leslie Wexner and just like Bill Gates. And I can't get any deeper than what I just said. But they're the bosses, meaning that Jeffrey Epstein was a vehicle. Jeffrey Epstein, I think you all know, he was not a real billionaire. He was he came from a middle class background in Brooklyn. He went to NYU. In the summer, he used to drive a taxi. And this information is not out there. This information was given to someone I know by a childhood friend of Epstein's. Uh, and so when people repeat some of the information that I shared, such as, yeah, Jeffrey Epstein was driving a cab, but they don't cite me, and people then try to find this information in mainstream media, you're not going to find it there. You're not going to find it there because the real work is being done by people who are talking to people who knew Jeffrey Epstein in his youth. And so little nuggets like that, mainstream media is not going to discuss because it ruins the narrative of this meteoric rise of Jeffrey Epstein, the talented Mr. Epstein, the Epstein who after working at Dalton, he ends up at Bear Stearns, then ends up being money manager to billionaire Leslie Wexner, and then suddenly he's the money manager for Leon Black. In any event, my point with this podcast is I see that mainstream media is going to uh, steer the conversation about Bill Gates into it being one of bad behavior, men behaving badly, having an affair here, an affair there. But they're not going to delve deeper than that. And when you delve deeper than that, that's where the dark stuff comes from. So for example, in my research, I've discovered that it's very likely that Bill Gates, as one example, Bill Gates and Prince Andrew, with the help of Jeffrey Epstein, did business deals together. And no one to date has asked Prince Andrew, how much money did you make from your relationship with Jeffrey Epstein? Because Prince Andrew, in that interview in November of 2019 with the BBC, when asked by Emily Maitlis, do you regret meeting Epstein? His response was no, because of the people I met and the opportunities I had. Well, he's not talking about just having a nice meeting with somebody. He's talking about making money. Okay, that's what he means, and he means it literally. And but no, but she didn't ask him, well, how much money did you make from your relationship and your meeting Jeffrey Epstein, who introduced him to Bill Gates and many other people who partnered with Prince Andrew, who, by the way, is supported by the people who live in the UK, right? Because the taxes of the UK go to pay the monarchy. And come on, so like there's a lot of stuff that should be transparent to all citizens, but no, because the elites, and I'm sorry, I'm going to continue to call them the elites, they run the show, and the less you know as an individual, the more money they make because they think we're fools. We're not going to look carefully at their dealings, but we're looking a little bit more carefully now. So my point is, do not let mainstream media distract you from investigating deeper into the layers of people like Bill Gates, into the layers of people like Leon Black, into the layers of the deals done by Prince Andrew, into the layers of Leslie Wexner. Go deep, keep digging, follow all of those rabbit holes, because we're not going to we're not going to get these men to step forward and talk about the fact that what greased these business deals was the fact that, yeah, Epstein was around with these minor girls and boys, by the way. There were boys too, and some were women of consensual age, but they were still being trafficked, okay, as well as younger men who were still being trafficked, and they would grease the deal. You know, if you have sex with a minor, and you're talking business, you're more inclined to do business because, well, number one, you're going to make money, and number two, hey, if you don't do business with us, I have a video of you and a minor, so does anybody have a chance in that environment? The answer is no, right? One way or another, whoever they want to do business with, they're going to do business with, and they're going to make money because there was this other thing helping them out. This machine that was used effectively for many, many years by Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. So, on that note, I will say please leave your comments in the comments section. I'd love to hear what you have to say. Like the video. I always forget to ask you to please like this video, and continue to follow me. I'm on Twitter. Have a good day. It's Monday, so let's have a good week, all of us. Okay, bye.